everybody, it's Allison. Welcome back to my channel. And today we are going to be finishing up a video that I started several weeks ago. You've seen a little bit of this video in my introduction of the Waffle Flower Blocks of Fun release. So we're going to be making these two cards today. Two cards that use the same two colors and the same two products, but they're different. So the product we're using is the Postage Collage Die. This is new and again was part of the Blocks of Fun release. And this is the matching stencil set. There are two stencils. So I have already cut this using a white panel of cardstock. So here that is just a plain white panel. And that's just using the die. And the die, by the way, doesn't have an outline. So it doesn't like cut an outline. You can use it on any size paper. Here's the Postage Collage Die. This is the original A2 die. And I cut that from white paper. And now I'm going to use this envelope die. And I'm just lining it up to where there's like little, I think there's stitching around the edge of this postage die. And I'm just lining it up with that. And I'll just add a little bit of tape to make sure it doesn't move when I run it through my die cutting machine. And here we go. So let's see how this came out. So you see how it cuts little openings for the flaps of the envelopes. All right, we are going to use Distress Oxide today. And I'm using two colors, Spun Sugar and Speckled Egg. And I have my tiny little grip mat to hold my ink. And of course I'm using my media mat to do my ink blending. I thought it would be fun to do both colors on this panel at kind of an angle. So I'm starting with my pink. And I'm not going to really overlap the colors too much. I don't really want purple on this panel. Now I have an O on my brush. You can see that. I added that with some permanent marker so that I know what is a brush that I'm supposed to be using with my oxides, because really you don't want to mix your brushes with regular dye ink and oxide ink. So I do my best to remember, and I have lots of sets of brushes, so these are my oxide brushes. All right, now I have my large grip mat, and I have the first stencil here, and I'm using my favorite brush, my shader brush 2+ from Waffle Flower. Now I just want to add some shading to give the illusion of the envelope shape. I don't want to make my envelopes very dark, so I'm flicking in from the edge of the stencil just to add that slight outline. And you'll notice that I am using Distress ink now. I have my little mini ink cubes. And that's because Distress ink, it just comes out a little darker and more vibrant than oxides, so I thought it was a good way to shade with the same color. And so here's what it looks like. I'm going to go back in because I want it slightly darker, and I do lift my stencil every so often to get a good idea of how things are looking. Now I believe these stencils are marked 1 and 2, but I think I grabbed the second one without thinking. I really don't usually worry about the order of stenciling with layer stencils. And it worked out fine for me with these cards, but there's a tiny heart on this second stencil that probably works best if you actually use it as the second stencil, especially if you plan on making the envelope flap darker than the bottom part. You would probably have to come back in with this stencil to make those little hearts darker. Now this envelope up in the corner is the only one that has both colors on it, so I'll shade part of it with the Spun Sugar, and then I'll come in with the Speckled Egg just to add shading on the rest. And again, I'm really trying not to overlap the two colors too much. I mean, there's nothing wrong with purple, but I just wasn't really going for that look. So again, just ever so gently flicking in from the edge with this brush. And that's why I love these brushes, is because you can get just the smallest of details with them. So here is what we have. And now I have the second stencil, which again is actually stencil number 1. And this is for coloring the flap of the envelope. So I'm just going to flick in from the edge of the stencil to add some slight shading. And I'm just basically adding shading to the top of the envelope. So there's what that looks like, that bottom blue one. And now I can work on this pink one up top. So again, you can get the tiniest of details with these brushes. All right, so here is what we have. And I think it's really sweet. All right, now I'm going to take the second panel that I created with the Postage Collage Die, and I'm going to alternate colors on the envelope. So I'm going to bring in my acetate sheets to use for masking so that I don't accidentally get pink ink on a blue envelope or vice versa. These are the same acetate sheets that I use for stamping, and you'll see that in a bit. These sheets actually come with the grip mats, so you'll often hear me refer to them as carrier sheets. So now that those envelopes next to this one are masked off, I can just go in with my blue ink. Now I'm going to come back in with the same color of Distress ink just to make those tiny hearts a bit darker. Again, Distress ink is just a bit more vibrant and darker than the Oxide. And remember, I had accidentally used the wrong stencil, so I knew that I wanted to get these hearts fairly dark, so I didn't have to come back in with this stencil again. Now I just repositioned the acetate sheets so that I could ink up another envelope. And the benefit to using the acetate is that I don't have to waste tape, and these are just really easy to wipe up when I'm done. So here is some pink, and again coming in with the Distress ink on the tiny little heart. Now here's the second stencil for the flaps, and my plan was to make the flaps lighter than the rest of the envelope. So here's what it looks like. I did come back in with both stencils just to make things a little bit darker, and it was easy to line them back up. So here is what the final result looks like. And again, very different from the first one, same colors, very different look. I love them both. All right, I told you I was going to use those acetate sheets for stamping, so let's make a sentiment. Here's that sheet, and this is my mini Misty. I'm just going to throw that in there. And I just randomly put my stamp in. It doesn't have to be straight or anything, and I stamp right on the acetate. And now I have used the matching die to cut a piece of white cardstock, so I have my die cut. And now I can just line it up underneath the acetate so that it is perfectly positioned under that stamping. I can't tell you how much I used to struggle with stamping a sentiment and then using the die to cut it out, and then it wouldn't be straight. It was just so frustrating. All right, now that I have it where I want it, I can wipe the ink off that acetate. I removed it from the Misty, and then now I'm stamping directly onto the die cut. Now this was a brand new ink pad because my other one was going dry, so this is a lot juicier than I'm used to, and I really didn't need to stamp it twice, but I did. It doesn't look great. So what if you want to make another one? What if you want to make multiples, or maybe you even want to heat emboss? I just take the negative piece from that die cut and I place it around the one that I just stamped, and then I can add a new die cut into that opening, and I know that it's still perfectly positioned. And again, this is gripping to the grip mat that's inside my Misty. You have to have that grip mat in there. Now this time I want to heat emboss, so I just wipe some anti-static powder, and I'm going to stamp with my Distress Oxide. Oxides are great if you want colored embossing. You do not need a bunch of different colors of embossing powder. You just need pigment ink and clear embossing powder. Now the one thing about Distress Oxides I find is that I do need to stamp a few times just to get a solid stamping, and maybe that's because my ink pads are drier than they should be. I may have mentioned before that I am terrible about re-inking my ink pads. Those Distress ink cubes that I have had those for years and years and years, and most of them I have never re-inked. So they're pretty amazing. Now the trick here is to grab the die cut with your tweezers in between some letters. So you do need to be careful. You don't want to cover up anything, otherwise that area wouldn't be embossed. But once you position the tweezers, it really doesn't move. And I have found this works really well. I don't really like running something that's embossed through my die cutting machine because sometimes it ruins the embossing or flattens it, or especially if you have marks on your plates. Not always in a really noticeable way, but then there's the issue of going through the trouble of embossing something and then you die cut it and it comes out all wonky and then you have to go through the whole process again. So here is this perfectly embossed sentiment, and I haven't decided at this point which card I'm going to use it on, but there it is. All right, now we are ready to make the cards, and here's one element, the Postage Collage Miniature. This just came out. I think this is still a freebie with a purchase of, I want to say $60. I'll have the details in my blog, and I know it was while supplies last, but look at this adorable little duo set. It comes with the die and the teeny tiny little stencil, and this is on my 4x4 grip mat, and I'm holding it because the stencil is really small and I just am afraid it might move, but it really didn't. But look how adorable this is. And yeah, I love it. All right, I have this little envelope. This is from the Postage Collage Mini Seals die set. And I'm just, again, adding my spun sugar oxide to it just to add a little bit of shading. I just love all the stuff that came in this release. There's a lot of fun envelopes, and you can see the seals up at the top left. I haven't used those yet. I will be using those soon. And here's a little letter, or you can put this little miniature postage collage in there. All right, now for this card, I don't want the flaps to be glued down because even though I'm not going to open the flaps on this card, I like the look of, you can still tell that they're not completely attached. So I'm being very careful to glue around the flaps, but not on the flaps because I don't want them glued down. I want, if somebody who gets this card wants to see if they open, I just want the look of it. So just being really careful. And I've cut a turquoise panel that's just slightly bigger than this. I don't remember the measurements of this, but these both are obviously smaller than an A2 card because I will be attaching it to that white A2 card base. And all right, these are the Postage Collage Mini Seals, this little stamp set, and I thought it would be so cute to put some little images on these little teeny tiny stamps. So I picked a couple from that set, and then this is the original Postage Collage stamp set, the very original, the OG Postage Collage stamp set. So I'm just stamping a few of those on here. And now I decided, even though I had already prepared my card base, I wanted to come in with this stamp. So I did add some masking tape on the side because I didn't want this stamp to get on my white card base. And voila. All right, now I did also create some little pink stamps. And look, you can cut these apart really easily, and they look like little stamps. And that's the genius of the collage dies from Waffle Flower. All right, for my sentiment, I'm using my new Card Maker's T-Square. I introduced this in my last video from Pear Blossom Press. And this little stamp with the heart, I thought it would be cute to actually cover up the little heart that's on the actual envelope. And here's the final card. The little sprigs that are popping out of the envelope, that's from the same set as the envelope itself. And I just think this card is really adorable. All right, let's finish up this second card. I have a self-healing craft mat underneath here, and I have the die for the sentiment that I plan on using, and so I'm just kind of trying to figure out the position of where I want this, because I want one of these envelopes to be open, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. So I've decided I want my little sentiment to be down there, and this pink envelope over here is the one that I want to be open. So I'm using that T-square again, and I have this Place and Score embellishment wand from Simon Says Stamp. You see me using the little grippy tip for adding embellishments a lot. This side right here has a little scoring tool, and so I'm just using my T-square to keep my scoring tool in a straight line. And now I'm coming in with my bone folder and just helping to reinforce that score line to open this very carefully. And so now I'm going to take a second panel that I cut with the Postage Collage die, and I'm adding some of the same pink ink that I used on the envelope itself. So now, you know, if you ever saw any of it, I really didn't know what I was putting in this envelope yet, so I wanted it to look solid. Now I flipped it over and I'm coloring the flap because the flap's going to be open and I want the flap to be pink just like the envelope. So this is what it would look like if you could actually see it open. So now it's all pink. Isn't that cute? All right, so here's the little letter that I showed you earlier, and I'm gonna tuck that in there. So you'll see part of the flap and you kind of maybe see part of the inside. So I think it was worth doing those little details. Now this teeny tiny sentiment comes from the original Postage Collage set, and it fit perfectly on one of these little lines of this paper. So I am using that acetate sheet to make sure it's lined up perfectly before I stamp. And it really was just the perfect size sentiment to put on here. I did add a heart as well to this little paper. You'll see that there. And the rest was basically just stamping postage elements onto the panel, again, from that original Postage Collage stamp set. I did add some tiny black glossy hearts onto the envelopes where the stenciled hearts were. And then you can see some more of those cute little sprigs coming out of that open envelope. And the sentiment I heat embossed onto black paper, and I used that same method that I showed you before, where I die cut it first and then embossed it. So that is it for that card, and I hope you like both these cards. I'm curious to know which one you like better, so I would love a comment below. Let me know. And that's it for me today. I appreciate you joining me as always. If you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.